Hey you guys, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about my March wrap-up, and somehow I didn't read a ton, but I felt like I read a lot, so let's get into it. So the first book that I read in March was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, a counterintuitive approach to living life, or to living a good life by Mark Manson. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I felt like this was a very funny read, well, if you guys don't know, this is a self-help book kind of teaching you how to live a better life by caring less. Yeah. It's interesting. But I definitely enjoyed the book. It really, I think after a while, or like after a few pages, it really makes you evaluate your life and see kind of where you are putting too much energy into things and why that might be bringing you down, or what aspects of certain parts of your life you can control. So I definitely highly recommend it. However, I do want to say that his this humor is very sarcastic, it's very crude at times, and if you don't like that kind of humor, I suggest probably not picking up this book because it does run throughout the entire novel, the entire novel, and it does come off as a little pretentious at first, so be wary. The next book that I read is actually a poetry collection, and that is Wild Embers by Nikita Gill. This is, like I said, a poetry collection of kind of feminist kind of sounding things. There are a lot of self-love, retellings of certain mythologies that I enjoyed, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. I thought this was a really well-written poetry collection. There were a lot of things that I could identify with, and even if I didn't identify with it, I thought that there was still a lot of things that I could glean off of whatever the poem was saying. So I highly recommend it. All the poems flowed and everything had a very important message in my eyes. The next one is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. I gave this an overall 5 out of 5 stars. This is a short story collection, and I do have individual ratings for the other short stories in my Goodreads review, which will be linked down below with the rest. I highly enjoyed it. I thought that her books, everything flowed really well. Her writing style is so poetic and so descriptive that I loved it. All of the stories followed her central message, which was kind of violence done upon women's bodies. However, my biggest problem was that I felt that some of the stories dragged on a little too long, and some of the stories that needed more descriptions kind of did not get that. But I still enjoyed it, and like I said, my individual reviews for my individual ratings for the short stories are listed in my Goodreads review if you want to check that out. The next book that I read in March is Dumplin by Julie Murphy. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Dumplin follows Willow Dean Dixon as she kind of traverses through her life in Texas as a fat girl in school. Her mom is a beauty pageant queen and still does beauty pageant-like things throughout the rest of her life, and she does not fit that category at all. So as kind of an act of rebellion / revolution, she joins this to kind of prove to the world and herself that just because she is rounder than most girls, she is still qualified as beautiful and still deserving of the same kind of respect and attitudes that you would give skinny girls. Like I said, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought this was a really cute and fluffy read. It does have a very important message, and it was so enjoyable to read through, but my biggest gripe with it was that I felt like, in comparison to the movie, the mother-daughter relationship didn't seem to be on as much of a stable ground as it did in the movie, as well as I didn't enjoy this weird love triangle situation that happened between her, Beau, and Mitch, which wasn't much of a love triangle to begin with. So it kind of dinged me on that, but I still enjoyed it, and I still think the message is absolutely gorgeous and stunning to read about, which is why I gave it that 4. Possibly one of my favorite books of March, and that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars, and I do have a full review, both spoiler and non-spoiler filled, in my channel, which I will link down below. I do have it stamped when my spoilers end, so if you want to finish off the review, just a heads up. But this follows the band Daisy Jones and the Six, who kind of broke up at the peak of their career. They were on their second album, and no one knows why. No one in the world knows why. Until several decades later, where someone does an oral interview of all the members and their family members to see what happened to this kind of really well-known and well-loved band. Like I said, I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I did not know this was an oral, history going into it, so that kind of surprised me. It's all interview based, but I did highly enjoy it. Taylor Jenkins Reid has this way of creating flawed characters that you root for, and no matter what happens, you still want to root for them, you want them to be happy. And I was just very emotional reading this book, and I'm still not over it, and I need more friends to read it, to scream about it with. But I do have a review, so if you want to go ahead and pick that up, I will let you know. And don't be surprised if I end up hauling the UK Waterstones edition because it is rainbow and has black sprayed edges and I need it in my life. The next book that I read is China Rich Girlfriend by Kevin Kwan. This is the sequel to Crazy Rich Asians and is the second book to the overall trilogy. Now this follows, I do have a book of the week on this, so just check that out down below as well if you guys want to see my thoughts as I was reading through the book. But this follows Rachel Chu 2 years after the events of Crazy Rich Asians while she is living her life now with Nick, and chance kind of happens where she is placed in a situation where she gets to know more of her family. That's all I can really say without giving out spoilers, but I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. I thought that there were still a lot of good things, a lot of funny aspects of this book. It was a really quick read once you got into it. Characters were more fleshed out. They flipped out. They worked a lot better, if that makes sense. However, I could not bring myself to care about one of the Kitty Pong's story arc in the beginning, and I didn't care about it until like the last few pages of the last 200 pages of this book. And she had such a huge part in this story that I was just kind of like rolling my eyes every time she popped up on the pages. I also don't like the writing style. I have read Omniscient Point of View before. I enjoy it. However, I feel like there is a hard line where you just jump into so many different perspectives without a warning that you can't get comfortable in it without jumping into another one. As well as the footnotes. I felt that the footnotes they don't serve a great enough purpose for me to have them in the novel. In the first book, I somewhat understood why, but now it just feels like the author is trying really hard to be quirky and funny and cute to the audience by adding their own like personal opinions of the things that they're footnoting. And I just think that since it is an omniscient kind of point of view, you could insert what you need, like the translations, the meanings, the whatevers you want to add into the actual narrative and not have it be so clunky and not have to kind of ruin the flow with several different asterisks and definitions and however you want to put it. The last book that I read in March is Cersei by Madeline Miller. This is a retelling on the Cersei mythology, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. You guys know me. I love Madeline Miller. I can't wait for her 3rd book to come out, whenever that is, or whatever that is, because I have heard nothing about it, if she is writing a 3rd book. But this is her sophomore album, and it follows the Cersei myth, essentially, and I loved every single minute of it. And I give this a 5 out of 5 stars. And I would go more in depth into it, but unfortunately, I am creating a full-on review of this that I will be linking. That will be coming out not this week, but the week after. Or this Sunday. Yes, this Sunday. So keep an eye out for that if you want to hear more of my thoughts. But just know I enjoyed it, and it made me emotional, but not in the same way that the Song of Achilles makes me emotional. It's more of the hopeful kind of emotional and not the bittersweet emotional is the best way I can put it without spoiling anything. But that is it for the books that I read in March. Like I said, not a huge list. I had 2 more books that I wanted to finish this month, but they are behemoths, and I'm not going to get to that until probably this month. Like I said, any reviews will be linked down below. If I missed them, please let me know. I am forgetful. And until my next video, all my social media links will be down below if you want to chat with me, suggest any books, talk about books that you have read recently and want me to read, talk about books that we have both read recently. But until then, I will talk to you guys everywhere else. Bye!